There you go.
All right. Oh, wait till 10:30 slot here. Well, according to my notes and calculations, it's now 10:30, and that means it's time for Brainstorming the Human Connection, brought to you by the South Dakota Humanities Council. And this is a program that's very interactive. We try to figure out things that people ought to know, but may not know about, and then find people to have a conversation with about various topics. And today our topic is going to be SiouxperCon. Now, that's probably not something everybody's familiar with, but by the end of this conversation, I hope more people will be familiar with it. Our guest today is Shane Gerlach, and he's the director of SiouxperCon. And welcome, Shane.
Thank you very much for having me, Lawrence. This is exciting. I'm a big fan, so this is very cool to be on this program.
Great. So let's start off really by talking about who Shane Gerlach is. Give us some kind of idea of what your background is, where you grew up,
Sure.
the elevator speech.
Sure. So I was born on Fort Carson Army Base. My father was drafted into the military, but because his brother was overseas, he was company clerk at Fort Carson, where I was born. Shortly after my birth, we came back home to South Dakota, Flanders, South Dakota, in fact, where neither of my parents had any connection to, but they had an opportunity to start a beauty shop there, and they did. And so I grew up a beauty shop kid. So this is why it's like this now. I blame my parents for all the perms and bleaches and hairdos that they did to me over the years. They took it all. Yes, I was very much practiced. I grew up there. One of my fondest memories as a child was my father giving me permission to go to Pirates Rexall Drug, which was 5 doors down from their beauty shop, the Ladybug, to go to the comic book rack and pick out comics. And so, I mean, comics have been a passion of mine. I've advocated for them. I've spoken on radio and public libraries about them. They helped form my vocabulary. I was reading at a 4th grade level as a kindergartner, as a senior, as a 4th grader, and I owe all that to comic books and having to figure out their magical words and made up words and everything else, and put those into context in my head. I was a speech and debate and theater and band and choir, and I excelled in all those things. Went on to SDSU, Dakota State, and eventually my degree from USD. I tried to spread my funding across the state. I am currently a father of a wonderful 15-year-old boy who is in his 4th year of recovery from stage 4 brain cancer. I am married to a beautiful breast cancer survivor wife who's way too good for me. I outkicked my coverage, Lawrence. I am the son to a beautiful mother. And for my real gig, I get paid to work with people changing their lives as a drug and alcohol counselor here at Carroll Institute in Sioux Falls. So there's the elevator pitch. That's who I am.
Okay, thanks a lot. I'm sure there's a lot more under the hood, because those things are just seem like the wax on the car. You know?
They're the shine. They're the shine.
There you go. There's the shine. So let's talk about SiouxperCon, though. What is SiouxperCon? How did it get started? Tell us about that.
So SiouxperCon started with an idea on Facebook. Brian Brockmeyer, the co-founder of SiouxperCon, put a message on Facebook and said, if we had a comic book convention in Sioux Falls, would you come? And then Brian at the time was working in customer service, and he recruited or voluntold some of his team at Citibank, hey, we're going to do this and you guys are going to help me. I was doing comic book talks in libraries and was on Yankton Radio doing some comic book stuff, but I was at Yankton Library, Vermilion Library, and doing graphic novel talks and comic book talks, trying to get people engaged. And Brian and I knew each other. I was also at the time running a youth group in Yankton, and his youngest sister was in that group, so I knew him through that. And I contacted him, and Brian will dispute this, but I scrolled back 8 years through my Facebook messages and found the place where I contacted him first and said, hey, we need to talk about SiouxperCon. And he brought me on board, and because I knew a lot of comic book creators, and so I came on bringing the comic book creators on to that first convention. Brian, myself, and Danny and Joe, who worked for Brian, put the entire convention on our credit cards. We rented a hotel. They stuck us in the basement like everyone does with nerds. Let's put them in the basement. We had the breezeway, and we had one meeting. And we needed 500 people to show up to break even. And we had 1,200 people show up that first year. So we thought, well, maybe this has some legs.
Exactly. Go.
Yeah. So it's all volunteers, and we just had a staff of 8 of us running like crazy to start. And we begged, other nerds in the community and other people to come in, please volunteer. And so we had somebody running games, video games. We had somebody running board games, and I continued to book guests. And then Brian asked me if I'd be the chairman of the board, and I said, sure, why not? I didn't know what that meant. Never been on a board. None of us really knew what any of this meant. We were making it up as we go, consulting with lawyers as needed. Got our nonprofit status right from the beginning. That was a passion of the original board, is that the easy way to do this would have been to make money. The hard way to do this is to give all the money away and then beg for a year to get money again to throw this thing the next year. So right away from the start, we donated to charities. The second year, we had 3,600 people show up, and we outgrew the Ramcota. And we moved into the Sioux Falls Convention Center. That was our year 5 plan, Lord. So we made it in year 3. This will be year 8. Our new logo this year is SiouxperCon to Sioux Falls and beyond. It's our kind of our pitch to Pixar, So that's. But so 8 years strong, we're going. A staff of 42 volunteers, a board of 5. It's amazing how quickly it's grown. Last year we had 7,100 unique paying guests come through the door over the 3 days, and we're expecting. Nelson, our board president, expects 10,000. He's very optimistic. I may be a little more pessimistic. I expect around 8,000. But we'll see what happens. It's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, that's a good overview. But what we probably should do is now talk about a little bit under the hood. What is kind of the purpose of it? What do you try to accomplish for all of that effort?
So, Lawrence, we wish to create a safe place for people to celebrate who they really are through their fandoms. That's a big blanket statement, right?
Yeah.
Our goal is to educate people in STEAM and to engage people in their passions, no matter who they are, no matter what their identity, their belief system, whether that be biopsychosocial, political, economic. It doesn't matter. When you walk in the door of the Sioux Falls Convention Center, which we take over for 3 days, you are accepted for who you are, period. I think it's very important that we exist for that reason. Giving money to charities is wonderful. It's an amazing effort that we do, and I'm very proud of that. Um, but what I am most proud of that we do is for people to come in and see others like them.
Right.
Uh, it was year 2, no, year 3, excuse me, year 3. And we had closing ceremonies, and a young lesbian committed couple came up to Brian and I, and they said, "We moved to Sioux Falls because of your convention." Now, I want you to think about that. That's 2018, 19, 2019.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sioux Falls, South Dakota.
Mm.
Growing in its population, in its diversity, and in its acceptance of people. But for a young couple to walk up and say, "You made us feel so accepted here that we've chosen this as our home." Come on. Come on.
Yeah.
You know,
That's the thing. Yeah.
when we have mothers and fathers coming to us and saying, "This is the first place my child felt accepted, where they could be themselves, where they weren't bullied, where they weren't ostracized, where they saw each other, where they were like, this is someone like me. Oh, they watch anime too. Oh, they dress like that too. They're not making fun of the way I speak, my mannerisms, the way I dress." We yeah.
That's that's a really important contribution, and I'd like to first explore how comic books appeal to and draw people who, let's say, might feel marginalized otherwise.
Sure.
What's the connection there?
Sure. I really think that, when we think about the iconic superheroes, Peter Parker was a science nerd who got picked on by the jock Flash Gordon. He's at a science exhibit where he gets bit by a radioactive spider and becomes Spider-Man. And the beauty of that book from 1963 moving forward is Peter Parker never gets ahead. Just because he has these superpowers, it actually has created more problems in his life. Kal-El was an immigrant from another place, a stranger in a strange land, whose parents, if we want to do a biblical comparison, it's Moses in a basket, it's Kal-El, Superman, in a ship to safety away from imminent destruction. And in Stranger in a Strange Land, and written by 2 Jewish faith men, in the 1950s. And so here's this immigrant who is the best of us all, who we hold to a standard of what would Superman do. Bruce Wayne is an orphan. The X-Men, mutants with strange gifts and powers, hated by the very society that they vow to protect. This happened in the 1960s. When Stan Lee came up with the X-Men, and right in the midst of Black Panthers and Kent State and Haight Ashbury and all these different things. And here were these: "We hate you because you're different." Not too hard to put that allegory together.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then when he relaunched the X-Men, he had someone from a representation from every country: an African goddess, a Russian farm boy immigrant, a German who was hated for the way he looked. So very socially correct, and I won't say socially correct, but socially challenging these books were. And I think they drew people in because I could escape, right? I could see someone like me who, even though they had powers, still struggled.
Yes. That's a very interesting take on comic books. And I'd like to go back to something you were talking about earlier when you were talking about yourself and how you learned to read, and the world kind of opened up or maybe even formed as a result of your reading comic books. And I find that interesting, one, because I was reading also. I learned to read from looking at the funny papers on Sunday, and asking what they were. I actually learned to read before I learned my alphabet because I just memorized the words.
I as well. I did as well. Yeah.
The words were like pictures. They weren't like assembly of things. And I had of course, no idea of formal grammar or anything, but I kind of learned that from the comic books. And when I went to school too, I was already reading. And of course, the downside is school was really boring, because they were taking all that time to teach the other kids how to read.
Yeah, I recognize everything that you just said. So when you're already walking in, reading, and then it's see spot, run. It's frustrating. It's frustrating. I was lucky enough to have a kindergarten teacher in Mrs. Hogestrat. It's funny, I'm 55 years old. She's still Mrs. Hogestrat. It's but she then saw that and she's like, Shane, will you help the other kids? So she allowed me to kind of blossom that way. So reading, when you see a word adamantium, that word doesn't exist outside of comic books, or Thor and his hammer Mjolnir. Stanley Lieber, known as Stan Lee, the kind of the inspiration behind many of the characters for Marvel Comics. If he would just make up words, he was much like Dr. Seuss in that way, especially when he was writing Thor and the Asgardians, or he was writing Doctor Strange, by the hoary Hoths of Hogarth, and my Sanctum Sanctorum, and so I had to learn in context what these words meant, especially made up words. So I was one of the happiest days of my young life was in fourth grade, when the librarian at the Moody County Library in Flanders, South Dakota, let me start. In fourth grade, she let me start checking out books from the adult section.
That was a big time. That was a big thing back then, because it was this whole thing. They didn't really have a place for children in the library. In fact, at one time you had to be 16 to get in the library.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
We had a little kids section. I read all those books multiple times, and then she's like, okay, Shane, you can go into the long aisles, and boom, then your mind just explodes and you're taken away. And grew up in a town of 1,200 people, which Flanders was when I was growing up, to then I could explore everywhere. Books took me everywhere, and that was amazing. And I continued to read comics as well.
And speaking of that, we've been talking about words, and of course, when you're learning them as pictures, that also brings to mind, what role do pictures play in helping to create the context, meaning, and actually make the book come alive as opposed to just words?
Right. So this is one of the things that we really, really advocate for SiouxperCon, is engaging young readers who may struggle. But here's a graphic novel, here's a picture, and there's so many great ones out there. I mean, I could go on and on about all the great books that engage young readers. But if I see it, right, I visualize, because for some people they struggle with Clark Kent bound into the sky, but now I see it as I read it, right? Clark Kent bound into the sky, pulling open his shirt to reveal the Superman crest that we all know so well, right? So he went from this reporter who everybody looked down on, and he's bounding into the air. And here's this beautiful picture of it. There's some iconic pictures. You have Peter Parker, a 16-year-old boy, holding all this weight on himself from a collapsing. This is years and years before 9/11, a collapsing tower to save people and get them out. So you
Yes.
visualize that, you see that, and it's amazing, all these different visualizations. Now I can put the words that I struggle with to a picture, and someplace all those synapses are connecting. The dopamine is going crazy and going, I get it.
Yeah.
Right. And it's amazing. It's so cool to see that, and I think that's the power of graphic storytelling. So much so.
Yes, and I've often struggled with that whole kind of rejection of bringing pictures in to help people to visualize the meanings of words. It's almost like you want to make it hard to read. If it's something that helps the child to understand what's happening in that scene, it seemed like it would be helpful, but it's often been presented as something that's a deterrent to good reading. And I'm not sure if it's just because, that's the way they learned, the teachers learned, and so they figure that's the way you have to learn, or.
Right. Because tradition says we do it this way. But let's talk about one of the greatest educators in the world, Sesame Street. Sesame Street taught you words by seeing it. Even other languages, casa, and they had a picture of a house, right?
Right.
So they equated visually, and of course TV is a visual medium, but they didn't have to put the graphic next to the word, but they chose to, because they knew, here's how we engage, here's how we connect, here's how we grow young readers.
I'd like to bring the audience into our other participating co-interviewers. Do you guys have any questions? Comments? Comic books? What's your favorite comic books? Betty?
Yes, good morning. This is wonderful. No idea what I was in for. I have I have one great nephew who's autistic, high functioning brain that's somewhere out in the stratosphere. I have an older brother who could have easily gone on to be a professional cartoonist. Somehow these two worlds should come together more than they do. I just am excited. I can hardly wait to share this information with people in my family who will engage. You just got me right from the beginning here. And I read comics as a kid, but I don't have those kinds of things going on in my brain that require the pictures. I think I just have always had ease with reading and spelling and writing and stuff. So thank you. Carry on. I'll be here.
I think one of the really cool things that's happened is, coincidentally, the Hollywood has embraced comic books, and they've become, the movies have become the biggest sellers that there are, right? Whether that be Avengers or Spider-Man or Miss Marvel or whatever it may be. So libraries who've been advocates for graphic storytelling for years now could push those books up at the front instead of back in a corner and say, you loved the Avengers, try these. And we're talking Pulitzer Prize winning books like Mouse that tells the story of the Holocaust through cats being Nazis and mice being the Jewish oppressed, and of course we won't even discuss the French and their and their portrayal.
Who wants to discuss the French anyway?
Right, but one of the really cool things is Scholastic latched onto these books and went to teachers and said, push these books, whether it be Bone for Young Readers or our Sort of Super by Eric Gapster, who will be a guest at SiouxperCon again this year, and will be giving away, thanks to the South Dakota Humanities Council, 1,000 copies of his book for young readers to engage and meet the author and hear from him. And this is how I create this, which is going to be so cool. So yeah, local libraries. Sioux Falls. I mean, even a small library like Flandreau has a little graphic novel section, and I think that's important because I can go from my child section to this mid-reader, and even very much based for adults, very much based for adults. Fun Home, an amazing story of a young woman's travel to her sexuality and her family's, became a Broadway winning show based on the graphic novel. Yeah, Fun Home, a tragicomic comedy is just a beautiful book. So,
Well, before we go on, I'd like you to talk a little bit about when, where, and what time that the SiouxperCon is, and we'll probably put it up in the chat too. We'll have links, but it's good to say it anyway.
Yeah. So this year, SiouxperCon takes place at the Sioux Falls Convention Center and Arena. This year we've added the Arena. It'll be September 29th through October 1st. Friday, September 29th is our teaser day. That day we move in 100 vendors, 56 guests come in. They get all set up for y'all. And then at 3 o'clock to 7:30, you can wander the vendor hall. You can meet some of the guests. You can have photo opportunities. And then that night we have professional wrestling, which is a huge fandom. And then we have a dance. We have educational panels taking place. Saturday is our really big day. Saturday, 10 a.m. Opening ceremonies. I'm old school. I like to welcome everyone. Not many conventions do that. They just open the doors and go. I like to welcome everyone, set the tone, introduce our guests. And then we do a big countdown. The vendors' doors open. So there are main stage panels all day, educational panels, film festival, video game room, board gaming room, 100 vendors, guests, on and on until midnight that night. So that evening, we have a burlesque show. Burlesque in South Dakota is an interesting topic for another day, but we embrace and say, here is a safe spot for you to perform. And you don't have to come to that. We have counter programming going on across the area. If you want to go to the film festival, if you want to go and, to a improv show or a reading, you can do that also. But we are going to provide a safe space for people to be who they are and entertain others. And then Sunday is our Dakota News Now Family Day, and it's all family programming all day. We've got, so one of the really cool things is in year 2, we brought back Wilbur the Coyote. For those of you who grew up in Sioux Falls, Gigglebees, SiouxperCon brought back Wilbur the Coyote. So Wilbur will be out there harassing me and reading to kids. We've got Mr. Twister, the Butterfly House, the Great Plains Zoo, face painting, crafts, art, movies for kids. We're going to be showing the Pokemon movie with Veronica Taylor, who's the voice of Ash, the original voice of Ash from Pokemon. I don't know, Lawrence, it's just a huge party. And we go until 5 p.m. on Sunday, and then I finally fall down and sleep.
Yeah, that's the way those kind of things kind of work. Let's talk a little bit about again about the inclusion and how that works. And I really like to kind of focus on the ripple effect of that in terms of acceptance, and helping not just the people who are marginalized to, let's say, have more connections, but the people who don't know that they have marginalized themselves to have connection to people who have some bigger insight or different insight, another whole set of eyes to see the world in a whole different way, and create relationships for them. Can you talk about how the SiouxperCon facilitates that kind of possibilities?
Absolutely. So when you create something and you have passionate people, there's going to be headbutting. I don't care. We can love each other and have the same vision, but have different ideas of how to get there. And as Brian and I became kind of the leaders of SiouxperCon, Brian was like, slow and patient wins the race. And I was, let's kick the damn door down. Let's go.
Mhm.
And Brian was like, oh, I don't want to offend this group or that group. And I'm like, I remember finally
Yeah.
like grabbing him by the shoulder and say, Brian, they're not coming. They're not coming to our event.
Yeah.
Okay. So it doesn't matter how much red carpet we roll out to them. They're not coming.
You're not coming. Yeah.
So I think probably at that point, and I'm getting like hair standing on end here, it was, I don't know, 810 degrees, and we're at the park where Colville Lake is, and it's Pride weekend, and we booth there. I finally broke Brian enough to say, let's booth at Pride. Our line to our SuperCon booth was probably 5, 6, 7 people deep the entire day. Oh, I love this. I love this. Are you going to have this person? Have you heard of this? Oh, wait, this is happening in Sioux Falls. Sioux Falls has something like this. And they get on their phone and I'm like, you can actually take the pamphlet. You don't have to take a picture of it, you know, so that rippled, and then people came in, and cosplay is a very interesting thing. It's, and I knew nothing about it. I'm the comic book guy for SuperCon, and we had people who were experts in cosplay. So when
Can you tell us what that is? Can you tell people what cosplay is?
Cosplay actually stands for costume play. So it is how I would dress to there's some great pictures. These are homemade
Hollywood.
costumes.
It's Halloween on steroids.
It is, Lawrence. So people spend so much time creating these costumes of characters that touched them, that resonated with them, and they create these costumes. It's fantastic. So we have a huge cosplay competition. But in my mind, coming to South Dakota at a very young age, cosplay in South Dakota is camo and a deer stand, right? That's cosplay. I'm going to dress as a tree. but there is, Lawrence, we have like 150 people marching in our cosplay parade, and 100 entrants asking to have their costumes judged. And then on Sunday, we do this with the kids, and we have a kids cosplay. And it's so empowering. Oh my gosh, it is so empowering. And I was shocked. It's the vendor floor. I warn our vendors, when the cosplay competition happens, that 2 hours of the parade and the onstage, you're not making any money. Because the vendor floor is gonna just every chair is filled, 300 seats filled of people watching this beautiful pageant of creativity. So there's an acceptance. And what's really cool, Lawrence, and everyone, is when I see people's eyes just, almost cartoon, when they're walking and they're like dressed as like an anime character or a manga character, Japanese animation, right, that they've connected with. And no one knows who it is, but they see someone else dressed as a character from the same book or same show. And then it's like, oh, you know it too. And all of a sudden they're like, exchanging texts and phone numbers and taking pictures together. And yeah, it's pretty freaking cool, man. It's just, so there's that. And I think that's most important. And where I've seen the greatest impact on that is from, I don't have to be afraid of what the kids in the hallway are going to say. I don't have to be afraid of embracing this weird thing that I'm into, because here's 7,000 other people who are into this weird thing. Because we all have a fandom for something. Last year, the wonderful actor Jim Beaver was our featured guest. I thought people would be super excited because he's currently on the TV show The Boys on Amazon, which is based on a comic book. Oh no. It was supernatural. And the amount of people that stood in line to meet Mr. Beaver and get his, because of Supernatural. I'd never watched the show. I didn't realize it was a thing. It's a huge thing. This year, we're bringing in Sean Gunn from the Marvel universe. I'm like, here is a guy from Marvel. Here's Guardians of the Galaxy, biggest movie out this year. People are so excited because he was on the Gilmore Girls. Like, y'all Gilmore Girls fans are nuts. He was on every episode of the Gilmore Girls, and you all are nuts. You all are crazy because, like, there's going to be a line out the door of people who want to meet Kirk from Gilmore Girls. And see, I didn't know that, but it doesn't matter that I didn't know that. They knew that, and it touched them. And that quirky character he played on Gilmore Girls touched them in a way that now I'm going to, I get to meet him. So that's another cool thing we do, is like by bringing in these celebrity guests or these authors or artists that touched other people. You know, I get to meet the person who drew the character, who played the character, who voiced the character that touched me. And that's a pretty cool gig too. So we get all these little things, you know, that for 2 years, he's unable to make it this year, but the 2 years prior, we had Chef Justin Warner from the Food Network. Foodies, Lawrence, we ran out of his cookbook. We had to go to Barnes and Noble and buy all the copies they had of his cookbook. And that was by Saturday at 3. The whole town was out of Justin Warner's cookbook because that's how many, because they're like foodies. That's a fandom. This will be the 3rd year in a row we have a craft beer. That's a fandom. So how can I bring people? So I might come for Chef Justin Warner and I'll see all this cosplay and go, well, that's kind of weird. And then I go, oh my God, but that's a character I watched as a little kid. And then you're excited about it.
Yeah.
Right. So that's, I think, how we do it. That was a very long answer. I apologize. But I think how we do it is by putting up this big circus tent and inviting all the clowns in. And then, okay, so you might do slapstick and you might do, you know, mime, but okay, look, I just realized I love mime, you know, and I just realized I love slapstick. And it's just, we're going to force all these fandoms together and see what happens. And you know what's amazing? In 7 years, we've walked 2 people out, refunded their money and walked them out. That's it. 50,000+ people through the door. 2 people we've walked
2
out.
people. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Sharon says that she's read Mouse years ago and realized that this was a brand new and realized this was brand new at the time. And she can't remember the French part, but how were they portrayed?
The French were swines.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the French were swines. So because the Nazis were cats, right? Because the mouse, M-A-U-S, were the Jewish, represented the Jewish people. So the cats, obviously, their natural enemy. But the French were portrayed as swine.
Yeah, is that SW slime, or I thought you said slime?
No, SWINE.
Swine.
Yeah, they were
swine.
So they were pigs. They were porkers. They were they were bacon.
Yeah. Any more questions before we start to get into another angle here? Anybody else have questions, comments, favorite comic books, something you want to add? This is an interactive conversation, so anybody have anything else they would like to bring to the table? Don't keep pretending you're shy.
So,
okay,
Lawrence, may I ask a question of everyone?
Yes, sure.
So what is your fandom? Oh, I'm sorry, Sharon, go ahead, please.
Well, it's probably a lot less important than what you were going to say.
No.
Is there a little bit of politics in here that North Dakota wasn't invited, or?
So
Sharon, North Dakota has has 3 in a row conventions. They have a horror convention, a comic book convention, and a there's 3 of them in a row. Fan Expo is one. There's one. They're all in Fargo, and we've invited them down, and they've invited us up. But it basically goes SuperCon and then 3 conventions in a row in in Fargo. So we're all so busy, we can't enjoy each other. But they are, we have people who travel down I-29. You're more than welcome to us, no matter what they say as you pass Watertown and Brookings, and they try to push you back. You get to Sioux Falls, I've got a safe place.
You'll be
for
good.
Well, I'm living in Minnesota, and when you were here, what's her name? The singer, oh, big name.
Joan Baez.
No,
You.
not my generation. The stadium, the US Bank Stadium was full of people.
Oh, Taylor Swift.
Taylor Swift was here, and I thought,
Yes.
wow.
Yeah.
In the old town that night.
So there's music fandoms are huge, and we all have a genre that we connect with, a song that we connect with. And I have had so many musicians reach out to us about being a part of SuperCon, and I need a fourth, fifth, sixth day, just to fit that in. We have had we do have a dance, and we have had live music once, and our fans preferred having a DJ so they could say, "Oh, would you play this?" So, but yeah, music is a huge fandom, and I wish I could incorporate it more into the weekend.
One of the things that came to mind about using comic books to bring people in is how much those comic books and the ideas that are expressed become the future for all of us. If you go back to the Dick Tracy and Flash Gordon and all those people who were comic book heroes, and things who were just like exciting kids, and those kids grew up to be some of the people who invented all of the stuff that we have now, and we even in some sense take for granted, but are still on the cutting edge from things that were written 50, 100 years ago.
How many of you check your watch for a message just like Dick Tracy?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it was so much of that kind of thing. And so I'd like to muse or brainstorm with you a bit about the impact of the comics on the general society, whether they recognize the nerd kids or not. The nerds kids are making differences in their lives. Can you talk about that?
So I don't, well, let's just start at the top with Hollywood, right? So these kids who grew up reading these comic books, Zack Snyder, Bryan Singer, golly, why can't Gunn, all these creators, just like Lucas was, George Lucas was inspired by Japanese and the Westerns to create Star Wars. These young Hollywood creators were inspired by the comic books that they got every Wednesday. Wednesday is New Comic Book Day, by the way. It's when the new titles drop. And to the three remaining comic book shops in South Dakota, I applaud you. I love you, and that you keep fighting the good fight. Rainbow Comics here in Sioux Falls, Brookings Books and Comics in Brookings, South Dakota, and I apologize that I cannot think of the one in Rapid. Brett, are you still on? Brett, can you help me? What's the name of the comic book shop in Rapid City?
It is Heroes and Villains.
Heroes and Villains. That's it, kids. That's the list. 3 comic book shops in the entire state. Now there used to be, when I was growing up, a comic book spinner at your local drugstore or soda shop or grocery store, and they'd restock that every Wednesday, and you'd get your grubby little hands on them and you'd buy them. There's 3 stores in the entire state, and we continue on, and they hold the line, but they also realize we have to be more than that. We have to sell games, we have to sell pop figures, and we have to sell baseball cards, and so many other things that they do to keep people moving through the doors. So I think that Hollywood, of course, is a big one, but I think that there's, and this is my viewpoint, my hypothesis is that, you know, all these inspired creators saw something like you alluded to, Lawrence, the Dick Tracy, and like, why can't we have that? Why can't we have the flying George Jetson car? Why can't we have a self-driving car like Kit from Knight Rider? Why can't we? And I think that those seeds that are planted in all these different genres, why can't we live in a society where it's okay to be who you are?
Yeah, that's right.
So I
Well,
think
that's
that
interesting too. Go ahead. I'm
Barack
sorry.
Obama is a huge comic book fan, huge comic book
Mm.
fan. On his list of his, you know, at the end of the year, he puts out his top books that he read during the year. Is almost always a graphic novel or two on that list, including John Lewis's March Pulitzer Prize winning book, which was a graphic novel, all three volumes of it. So when you see something like that, you have thinkers, you have dreamers, you have creators that are inspired, maybe even challenged by, I want that now. Why can't I have an Iron Man armor? And if you've seen the video from the military of their propulsion, you know, as people are flying using gloves, propulsion gloves, just like Iron Man. I wonder where that idea came from, kids.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. But I think as much as one would say, why can't I have the feeling that they're saying, how can I?
Sure,
You know,
sure. Better phrasing,
you know,
much
it's
better
like,
phrasing.
you know, it's like, what do I do to make that? You know, what do I have to do? And, you know, this brings back an interesting connection that we often lose, and that is the connection between art and science, you know, which is an artificial division. And they always go playing back and forth on each other. The imagination, you know, comes to life in the laboratory, and a lot of these graphic novels will feature the laboratory as where these things start, and sometimes where they go awry, but that's the nature of science. And so it just seems like that's another way that it brings the world together, brings the art and science together, bringing the imagination together with the mutually verifiable.
One of the cool things that comic books can do, well, the written medium, and especially the sequential medium, you know, of graphic art, of graphic storytelling, is my budget is only dictated by what I can fit in the panel with a pencil. Right? That's my RD. That's my research and development right there. What I can fit on that panel or on that page, depending on what I want to do, that's my budget, how much ink I have in this pen. I'm not dictated by, here's your funding for your grant, here's our
Yeah.
research and development,
Yeah,
here's this,
yeah, that's
this
right.
transferred to this or this, that's my budget.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I
Yeah.
think that dreamers will dream, okay,
Mm.
and thinkers will think. Creators do both.
Yes, exactly, exactly. And these are the kind of things I think that whether you cover it or not at SuperCon, I think that that's an underlying message. And it's an underlying message actually in action, people doing it. It doesn't necessarily even have to be said. It's one of those things where it's lived. And so, you know, the dog whistle is whistling in every corner, you know.
Yeah, when I see, like when I walk our vendor floor as they're setting up, and then throughout the weekend as I walk the vendor floor, I'll stop and go, wait, you made that? Like, yeah, well, you know, I saw this, and, dude, and this is like 3D printing is now, you know, more prevalent in the things I'm seeing that our vendors sell, but there's still so much homemade craft. And that's one of the cool things we do too there is here's 100 vendors who might have a small Etsy shop or a small, you know, side gig, you know, now they get 7,000 people walking by their product. 7,000 people
Right.
going, I don't need that, but I want that. And I think that the
Exactly.
inspiration for
Yeah.
so much of that, like we have prop recreations, you can get a Captain America shield or a Thor hammer, whatever it may be. I even have one up on a couple of those up higher on my shelf there. But what's cool is I picked up things that I usually wouldn't, that don't appeal to my immediate fandom of comic books and fantasy, but still that's cool and I need it. I want it. I gotta have it, so yeah. And I'm always amazed by that mode of thinking. The steampunk stuff that people do, oh my gosh. And like who think I'm going to take all these gears and all these extra pieces and I'm going to create a clock or a lamp or dude, yes.
Over
Ingenuity.
engineer it.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
over engineer it to art.
yes,
Into art.
absolutely.
Yeah. Betty, you had something you want to say?
Just yesterday, somewhere I was listening to a program where a somewhat youngish professor who was teaching science was also a musician. And so she decided to just kind of play around with it and bring some music into her science lab. And it was like it never occurred to her that they are inseparable. And I'm seeing that now, it's kind of like when you go to get health insurance, it doesn't cover all of your physical body, let alone your mind. And we've been separated too long. It's time we all came back together, and we are. So that's just inspiring to me.
Yeah. It's so one of the things that we realized, Lawrence, as we were moving on with this is that with only 3 comic book shops, that there was a ceiling if we just continued to be a comic book convention primarily. So we had to branch out, and that's a little scary, because now I'm going to start inviting bigger guests, and we start out with, D list, perhaps had been, in a show once upon a time, and you start to invite and you start to see more and more. We had to grow to become a pop culture convention and embrace all fandoms, whether that be cooking, gaming. My gosh, gaming has made a huge comeback. There are multiple game stores in the Sioux Falls metro area. Board games are huge. We had so many people. If you're familiar with the Sioux Falls Convention Center, we take every square inch of the Sioux Falls Convention Center. And as you walk in the main entrance and you're headed south and you take a hard left, there is a bank of breakout rooms, of conference rooms. And we dedicate 3 of those conference rooms to board gaming. We had so many board gamers last year, we had to set up 8 tables out in the breezeway for people to game. We filled that
Wow.
room and had to move 8 more tables into the breezeway for people to continue
Wow.
gaming.
Wow.
So yeah. So, and then the video game room, of course, we know video games are huge. We put up 42 different monitors and 42 different video games, and we have tournaments, and my gosh, they're competitive. They are competitive. Things like that. And then over here, we've got a film festival where we're going to not only show films featuring our guests, like we're showing Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. We have Leatherface and the Stretch, who was the heroine of that particular film, coming as guests. So we're going to show that. But we're featuring 15 locally made films going on throughout the convention, where local filmmakers can have their shows viewed by, as many as we can fit in the room, and it's standing room only for many of them.
Yeah.
So, and then you go into, like we talked about, the costume making, craft beer. Last year we incorporated food trucks. Y'all are passionate about food trucks. You like to eat. we are Dakotans, and we will eat what you put in front of us.
That's right. Yeah.
The line
Even
to
if
the
it's
food truck,
even if it's Klub.
right? The lines to the food truck, Lawrence. Let me tell you. Yeah. So, and science fiction authors and fantasy authors. So, if you have a fandom and you think SuperCon's not for me, I challenge that, because we might not have your particular little thing, right? But somebody else there has your same fandom, and you'll find them, you'll
Yes,
see
that-
them, you'll recognize them.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I'm thinking of this as a connector, trying to connect people. What would you say is the kind of, let's say, pattern that people find a way to connect in a place where there's 7,000 people? What's the kind of thing other than physical proximity?
Yeah, yeah.
What's the thing that makes it happen?
The word that immediately came to my mind is safety. And I don't know if that's right or wrong, but it's what I see. So I know I'm safe here. I know that I won't be judged here. So I think that there's that connection. And you're right, even though it's not proximity, I know that you're over there doing your thing and you're just fine. And I'm going to be over here in the board gaming room, playing Ticket to Ride right next to a group that is going to spend 12 hours, dungeon diving and killing orcs, right next to a group that's playing Catan, right next to a group that's playing, whatever, and we're all safe. I'm going to be over here. Oh my gosh, Lawrence. And I mentioned this to you yesterday. I had a gentleman come to me, and close to my age, I would imagine. And he was going to walk into, last year we showed the Pomp Room documentary, which I hope you all have seen. Amazing, amazing documentary that captures a piece of culture of the 1970s and 80s and 90s from Sioux Falls. But we screened that at SiouxperCon with the directors. And he was going to walk in, and I was buzzing someplace, and he grabbed me, he says, Shane. And I said, hey, recognized him, recognized his face. And he says, do you remember the first time I wore a dress here? And I'm like, sure. And he's like, this is the first place I wore a dress. And I looked down, and I didn't even look down, but he's wearing a summer sundress, and fully bearded, hairy shoulders, combat boots, but he is wearing and I teared up.
Yeah.
I teared up.
Yeah.
I'm tearing up now talking about it because we created some place where I can wear a dress. So safety.
And it's not even Halloween.
Right. So I think I think safety is what is the if we're looking at that invisible line that connects all these different fandoms and is safety.
Right. And that what I find is interesting is the safety is constructed of a mutual, let's say, mutual desire for safety.
Right. Yeah.
I hold you safe, you hold me safe, we're all safe.
Yes.
Yes. And that's such a message to the world, is if we all look at a way to how do I keep you safe, because in the process it is keeping me safe.
Right. Last year we had a medical emergency, our first medical emergency. So what's really cool is out of the 42 staff members, I have a PA and I have a pharmacist on staff. Now they're not a PA and a pharmacist when they're at SiouxperCon. One's my MC and the other one runs my volunteers. But so they immediately, we set up safety words and stuff, and it came across our radios. So before my staff got there was a line of 14, 18-year-old girls locking arms, creating a pathway for the EMTs. Now, Lawrence, I could have walked through those girls. I am 5'10", 275 pounds. I could have broke that line, but there's no way that anybody was breaking that line. Let me tell you something. Nobody was breaking that line. Right? They just formed. They just it spread, And these girls and young men just
Mhm.
linked arms and said, here's your path for the EMTs to get there.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
They
yeah.
did, and we didn't ask
Yeah.
them to. We didn't ask
Yeah,
them
yeah.
to. They just created, if I'm safe, you're safe.
Right.
Just like you
Right.
said. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Well, we're coming right to the end of our show here. It's been a wonderful conversation. I look forward to joining you, and I'm going to try to push that on my calendar and come down. I can't say I'll wear a dress, but I might wear something that's even more outlandish, you know. But I'm just so happy that you guys are putting that on, and it's still going and it's growing. We hope that all of you will join us again next week. Thanks again, Shane, for joining us, and we'll hope to see all of you next week, same time, same station, for another Brainstorming the Human Connection. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.